My name is Claudine Rivers, and this is the story of how I lost 20 years of my life. Not because I did anything wrong, but because I trusted the wrong person. On March 14th, 2026, I walked out through the gates of Lee Arrendale State Prison in Georgia. In my hands was a clear plastic bag. Inside it, everything that remained of my life. $47. An old photograph of Samuel, my late husband, and the silver cross I had worn since I was 16. That was all. 20 years ago, I went to prison at the age of 52. Today, I walked out at 72. 20 years of being called by a number instead of my name. 20 years of eating cold meals from stainless steel trays. 20 years of watching the world pass by through barred windows. But what I lost the most was not those years. It was everything that was taken while I sat behind bars. The husband I loved, Samuel, died, and I was not there for his final moments. The house that had been passed down through 3 generations of my family sold to a stranger. And the savings of an entire lifetime of work, $180,000, vanished without a trace. And the person who took all of that from me was not an enemy, not a stranger. It was Tanya Rivers, my own sister. Athens, Georgia, the home and family I once had. Let me tell you about my life before everything collapsed. I grew up in Athens, Georgia, a small town about 70 miles northeast of Atlanta. It was the kind of town where everyone knew everyone else's business, where people waved at every car that passed, where families lived on the same land for 5 or 6 generations. Tanya and I grew up in a white house with a wraparound porch at the end of Maple Grove Road. It was my grandmother's house. Later, my mother inherited it from her, and in 1995, when my mother passed away, the house was left to me. Tanya received the life insurance money, $23,000. I received the house, which at the time was worth about $200,000, along with 3 acres of land. That was my mother's will. That was what she wanted. And I never thought much about it. I thought Tanya was fine. I thought she understood. I thought she accepted it. I was wrong. But that is a story for years later. Let's go back to 1987, when I was still happy, when I was still naive enough not to see the storm coming. I met Samuel Rivers at a craft fair in downtown Athens. He was selling handmade wooden furniture, tables, chairs, cabinets, all meticulously finished from local wood. I stopped in front of a bookshelf. "Made from oak," he said, running his hand along the grain. "This tree grew right here in Athens. It was 150 years old before a storm brought it down." The way he spoke about wood, with respect, with love, made me want to know more about the man himself. We talked for 2 hours that day. And 6 months later, I became Claudine Rivers. We never had children. The doctor said the problem was with me. We tried for years, spent money we didn't have on treatments that didn't work. I remember nights curled up on the bathroom floor, crying silently so Samuel wouldn't hear. I felt like my body had betrayed him. But Samuel never made me feel that way. The night the doctor confirmed we would never have children, he held me and said, "You're not missing anything, Claudine. You are everything I need." And in the end, I believed him. We had each other. We had the house. We had our work. I taught literature at Athens Academy. Samuel built furniture in the workshop behind the house. We weren't rich, but we were happy, truly happy. And there was Tanya. Tanya was 5 years younger than me. As a child, she was beautiful, the kind of beautiful that made people turn their heads. Golden blonde hair, blue eyes like our mother's, and a smile that could make you forget all your worries. My mother used to say Tanya could charm birds down from trees. And it was true. She had charm, a dangerous kind of charm, because it made you want to believe her, want to help her, want to save her, even when she didn't need saving. I spent my entire life protecting Tanya. When she was 7 and broke my mother's antique vase, I said it was my fault. When she was 16 and caught skipping school, I convinced the principal to give her a second chance. When she was 28 and her first husband left her, she moved in with Samuel and me for 3 months. I was always there, always answering the phone at midnight, always lending money, always believing her when she said, "This time will be different," because she was my sister. Because we shared the same bedroom for 18 years. And because I still remember so clearly, standing at our father's funeral, Tanya gripping my hand, trembling as she whispered, "You won't leave me, will you?" "Never," I said. "I'll always be here for you." I kept that promise, even when it destroyed me. Looking back now, I understand. Tragedy doesn't begin with a crime. It begins with trust and a promise spoken from a sister's heart. The night everything began to collapse was a Tuesday night in September 2006. Samuel was asleep. He had a big order the next morning, 3 dining sets to be delivered to a client in Savannah. I was sitting at the kitchen table, grading student essays on Romeo and Juliet, when I heard violent pounding on the door. At first, I thought something terrible had happened, a fire, an accident, or something worse. And when I opened the door and saw Tanya's face, I knew I was right. Mascara streaked down her cheeks. Her hands were shaking uncontrollably. Her eyes were sunken, ringed with dark circles, as if she hadn't slept in days. "They're going to kill me, Claudine," she said the moment I opened the door, her voice broken, choking. "They're going to kill me, and I don't know what to do." I pulled her inside, helped her sit at the kitchen table, made tea, waited for her to calm down. And the story Tanya told, my God, it sounded like a nightmare. She said she had fallen into gambling, not casual gambling, severe addiction. It started at casinos in Tunica, then moved on to illegal poker rooms. Then she borrowed money from people you should never borrow from. Loan sharks, dangerous men. "I owe them $140,000, Tanya whispered, gripping her teacup so tightly I thought it might shatter. "They gave me 30 days. "No one is going to hurt you," I said, taking her hands. "We'll find a way. I'll help you." But Tanya shook her head violently. "It's not about the money anymore, Claudine." Then she told me the rest. She said she worked as an accountant for a real estate development company in Atlanta. The boss was named Gerald Whitmore. According to Tanya, he was running a massive financial fraud, stealing investor money, laundering funds, hiding assets overseas. "I found proof," Tanya said, "and he knows. That's why those men showed up. Not because of gambling. It's Whitmore. He's trying to silence me." I should have been suspicious. I should have asked questions. But Tanya was crying. Tanya was shaking. And her hands were ice cold in mine. "What are you going to do?" I asked. "I'm going to the FBI," Tanya said. "But if something happens before then, someone has to know the truth." She pulled out a USB drive. "This is all the evidence." She placed it in my hand. "If I disappear, take it to the authorities. Promise me, Claudine." I looked into my sister's blue eyes, the eyes I had trusted my entire life. "I promise," I said. 3 weeks later, Gerald Whitmore was murdered. 2 days after that, the police came for me. 6 a.m., October 19th, 2006. Loud pounding on the door. "Athens police, open up." Samuel jumped out of bed. My hand gripped his. "There has to be some mistake," he said, but I saw the fear in his eyes. They had a search warrant. They found the USB in the desk drawer. They handcuffed me in my nightclothes, read me my Miranda rights. Neighbors watched. "Claudine Rivers, you are under arrest for conspiracy to murder Gerald Whitmore." The USB didn't contain evidence of fraud. It contained a murder plan. And then there was Tanya, sitting on the witness stand, wearing a black dress, sobbing. "I'm afraid of my own sister," she said. I watched her lie and still didn't believe it. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Verdict: guilty. 30 years in prison. Samuel screamed as they dragged me away. "I know you're innocent. I'll prove it." That was the last time I saw my husband as a free man. Lee Arundel State Prison in Alto, Georgia, a women's prison, the place where I would spend the next 20 years of my life. On the first day, they cut my hair short, handed me a gray uniform, took my photo, rolled my prints, took my fingerprints. Then they led me to my cell, 3 square meters, a metal bunk bed, a toilet with no seat. "Rivers," my cellmate said, not looking up from the book she was reading. "Who'd you kill?" "I didn't kill anyone," I whispered. She snorted. "Yeah, everyone in here is innocent, honey." That first night, I lay on the rock-hard bed, listening to cries, screams, and manic laughter echoing through the corridors, and I wondered how my life had ended up here. 3 weeks earlier, I had been teaching students about Romeo and Juliet, sleeping beside Samuel in a warm bed, drinking coffee on the porch, watching the sun rise. Now I was inmate number 482-739, woken at 5 in the morning by a shrill bell. Eating cold food from a stainless steel tray, told when to eat, when to sleep, when to use the bathroom. But I still believed. I believed in Tanya. I believed there would be an explanation. I wrote to her every week. "Dear Tanya, I don't understand what's happening. I don't understand why you testified like that. But I know you must have a reason. Please write me back. Explain. Help me understand. I love you. Claudine." No reply. I wrote again. And again. Every week, every month. Year 1, 52 letters. No reply. Year 2, 48 letters. No reply. Year 3. The letters started coming back, stamped, "Recipient refused." Samuel wrote to me. He wrote every day, long letters about how he was finding new lawyers, what leads he was chasing, how he was trying to prove I was innocent. "My love, I'm not giving up. I will never give up. I know you're innocent, and I will prove it, no matter how long it takes. I love you more than this life. Samuel." Samuel's letters were the only light in my darkness. I read them every night before I slept. I kept them under my pillow. Read them over and over until the paper crumpled and the ink began to fade. They were proof that somewhere, someone still believed me. In my 4th year, I started working in the prison library, helping other inmates find books, filling out legal forms, writing letters to their families. That job gave me purpose, gave me a reason to get up every morning. In my 5th year, Tanya blocked my phone number. Every time I called, a flat, soulless recording said, "This person has blocked your number." But I still believed. Still hoped, still thought that one day my sister would come back and explain everything. Then the 6th year came, and everything changed. March 15th, 2011. I was working in the library when Warden Hendricks came looking for me. There was something different on her face, softer, full of pity. I knew immediately, before she even spoke. "Samuel," I whispered. "Isn't it?" She nodded. "He passed away this morning. Heart attack. I'm sorry." Samuel, my husband. The man who promised he would wait for me. The man who wrote to me every single day for 5 years. He died at 68. In his woodshop, the place he loved most, his heart stopped beating. Can I attend the funeral?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. "You know the policy," Warden Hendricks said, avoiding my eyes. "Inmates convicted of first-degree murder aren't permitted." "I didn't kill anyone," I screamed. For the first time in 5 years. "I didn't kill anyone. I'm innocent." "And my husband died, and I can't even say goodbye." I collapsed to the floor, crying uncontrollably. The sounds tearing out of my throat didn't even sound human anymore. Wild, desperate, primal. Warden Hendricks knelt beside me. She didn't touch me. She wasn't allowed. But she stayed there. "I'm sorry, Rivers," she whispered. "I'm truly sorry." They put me in solitary, gave me sedatives. I slept for 3 days, waking only to cry, then sinking back into sleep. Samuel's funeral happened without me. I didn't know how many people came, who spoke about him, where he was buried, whether anyone placed flowers on his coffin. Did Tanya go? Or had she forgotten Samuel too, the way she forgot me? When I came out of solitary, I wasn't the same person. Something inside me had shattered, and I didn't know if it could ever be repaired. But I kept living. Kept getting up every morning, kept working in the library, kept eating, sleeping, breathing. Because somewhere deep inside, a small, stubborn piece of me still believed that there would be an answer. If you've ever wondered how much loss a human being can endure and still keep going, then stay with me. Because the years that followed didn't teach me how to hope. They taught me how to live when there was no hope left. In my 11th year, I met Helen Martinez. Helen was 70 years old. White hair, deep brown eyes, as if they had seen through everything. She was serving life for killing her abusive husband after 30 years of being beaten. She had been here for 23 years. We met in the library. She was looking for a book on Buddhist philosophy. "What are you looking for?" I asked. "How to let go," Helen said. "Let go of what?" "Everything," she smiled sadly. "The past, the future, and the hope that life will turn into what we think it should be." We became friends, or rather, Helen became the teacher I didn't know I needed. "You have to stop waiting," she told me one evening as we sat in the prison yard, watching the sun set behind the razor wire, waiting for your sister to come back, waiting for the truth to be exposed, waiting for your life to begin again. "But you don't understand," I said. "I'm innocent." "If you stop hoping," Helen said gently, "you'll live instead of merely existing." "How?" My voice cracked. "One day at a time," she said. "1 second at a time. You breathe. You find one small thing to be grateful for, a ray of sunlight. A good book, a quiet moment." I didn't believe her at first, but I had nothing left to lose. I started keeping a journal, not writing to Tanya anymore. Writing to myself, and very slowly. I learned how to live from small moments. In my 15th year, I accepted that this was not a temporary life. It was permanent. Samuel was dead. Tanya had vanished. The house, the money, the future, everything was gone. And somehow, I had to live with that. In 2020, the outside world changed. The COVID-19 pandemic. Prisons overcrowded. People dying in their cells for lack of ventilators. Georgia rolled out a new clemency program for elderly, nonviolent inmates. In 2023, a public defender came to see me. "Rivers," he said, placing a file on the table. "You qualify to be considered for early clemency." I'm going to be free?" I whispered. "If everything goes well, yes." 1 to 2 years. After I had accepted I would die in here, I didn't feel joy, only fear. Fear of trusting, fear of hoping, fear of losing everything all over again, and I feared the outside world, because I had nothing. But the process began. Paperwork, hearings, psychological evaluations, medical exams. And then, March 14th, 2026, exactly 20 years after the day I was arrested. I stood at the gates of Lee Arundel State Prison, holding a clear plastic bag, $47, a photo of Samuel. The silver cross. The gates opened. I was 72, white-haired, hunched. My knees aching with every step, but I was free, and I was about to discover what my sister had taken while I was locked behind bars. The bus from Alto to Athens took exactly 3.5 hours. I sat in the back row, the plastic bag on my lap, my eyes glued to the window as if I was afraid that if I blinked, everything would disappear. Georgia rolled past me like a film I had missed for far too long. More shopping centers, more chain restaurants. More traffic, more people. Or maybe the world had been like this for a long time, and I had simply forgotten what it felt like to watch life without bars in the way. I tried to remember the house, the wraparound porch, Samuel's workshop out back, and the big oak tree in the front yard, the oak my grandmother planted in 1952. 20 years without seeing it. 20 years carrying only memory. Would it still look the way I remembered? The bus dropped me at a gas station on Main Street at 2 p.m. The sunlight was so bright I had to squint, light that makes you dizzy after years in dim prison rooms. I stood there for a long time, just breathing. Outside air doesn't smell like prison. No bleach. No sweat. None of that damp heat of despair clinging to everything. Just car exhaust, coffee from the shop next door. And if I inhaled even deeper, I could catch the scent of grass and earth. Freedom smells different. Who would have thought that? My house was 2 miles away. I started walking. My knees protested fiercely after 15 minutes, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. After 20 years, I was walking home. I turned onto Maple Grove Road and my heart began to pound faster. Half a mile left, just a few hundred yards, and then I saw it. The white farmhouse at the end of the road. My grandmother's house. The house I grew up in. The house I lived in with Samuel. My house. For a moment, everything went still. The oak tree was still there, taller, bigger, but still my oak. The porch was still there, freshly painted, clean, neat. The lawn was neatly trimmed. I swallowed hard. A thought flashed through my mind, almost enough to make me cry with relief. Tanya kept her promise. She took care of it. I took a few more steps, and then I saw the blue minivan in the driveway. Children's toys scattered across the yard, a swing set out back, right where Samuel's garden used to be, and on the porch stood a woman. Young, around 35, heavily pregnant. She looked at me, confused at first, then quickly, wary. Not Tanya. A complete stranger. It felt like someone was squeezing my heart. "Can I help you?" she called down. I stood at the edge of the property, my mouth open, unable to understand what I was seeing. It took several seconds before I found my voice, and it sounded like someone else's. "This is my house," I said. "This is my house." The woman frowned. "I'm sorry, but maybe you're mistaken. We've lived here 16 years. 16 years. I heard it as if someone kept repeating the number inside my head until it became an echo. They had been in my house 16 years. The world spun. I grabbed the mailbox to keep from falling. "No," I whispered. "No, no, no. This is my house. I'm Claudine Rivers. This is my house." The woman's face went pale, and I saw it the moment she realized. She knew my name. Somehow, she knew. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Oh my God, you're... "I'm Claudine Rivers," I repeated, my voice trembling, "and this is my house. My grandmother's, my mother's, mine, my sister, Tanya. She was supposed to take care of it while I was away. Away. A strange word for 20 years in prison. The woman put a hand over her belly, instinctively shielding the child inside. Then she spoke slowly, as if weighing every word. "I think you should come inside. I think we need to talk." I followed her in. Every step felt like walking on thin ice. One wrong shift and it would shatter. This is my house. I know every floorboard. Every creaking door, every stair that cracked when you stepped. But everything was also not the same. The walls had been repainted, pale blue instead of buttery cream. Different furniture. Different family photos on the walls. Faces I had never seen. I passed the living room, the room where Samuel and I danced together for the first time as husband and wife, and saw children's toys scattered across the floor, a red toy truck, dolls, drawings held to the refrigerator with magnets, proof of a family living here, proof of a life that could have been mine if— "Sit down," the woman said, gesturing to the kitchen table. My kitchen table. Where I graded papers, where Samuel and I drank coffee every morning. She made tea, set down a plate of cookies, then sat across from me. "My name is Keisha," she said, "Keisha Nolan, and I don't know where to start." "You start by telling me why you're in my house," I replied. I wasn't angry, just tired. Bone-deep tired. Keisha took a deep breath. "We bought this house in 2009, me and my husband, Ryan. We were newly married then, looking for a quiet place to start a family." "Who sold it?" I asked. "A woman named Tanya Rivers." Keisha paused. She said, "She was your sister." Of course it was Tanya. "What did she tell you?" I asked. Keisha looked at me like she was afraid her answer would break me. "She said it was a family property. Her parents had passed away, and your sister, that you had died." The kitchen felt like the air had been sucked out of it. She said, "I died?" My voice was so small I could barely hear it myself. Keisha nodded, her eyes filling with tears. "She had documents, a death certificate, inheritance paperwork. Our lawyer checked everything. It all looked legitimate." A death certificate. Tanya made a death certificate for me. While I was still alive, while I sat in a cell, just a few hours' drive from here, Tanya told the whole world I was dead. I swallowed hard. "I'm not dead," I whispered. "I was in prison. I was convicted for something I didn't do, and while I was there, my sister—" I couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't force the words out. "Oh my God," Keisha blurted, covering her mouth. "Oh my God." "So we've been living in a stolen house, raising our kids in a stolen house. It was never really ours." "It's not your fault," I said immediately, as if afraid she would collapse under guilt. "You didn't know. You couldn't have known. But now we do." Keisha looked around the kitchen she believed was hers for 16 years. "And now, what are you going to do?" That was the question. What was I going to do? I could take the house back. Legally, it was mine. Tanya had no right to sell it. The sale was based on forged documents. I could throw this family out of the place they had lived for 16 years. A family with 3 children. I could hear kids playing upstairs. Children who knew nothing about the crime that had happened. I could take my home back. But then what? Live alone inside walls saturated with memories of Samuel? Everywhere would be a touch of the past. Every corner a knife reminding me what I had lost. I don't know, I admitted. "I got out this morning. I don't have a lawyer, no money, and I don't have anywhere to sleep tonight." Keisha looked at me for a long time. Then something shifted in her eyes. Confusion gave way to determination. "You're staying here tonight," she said firmly. "We have the living room, and tomorrow, Ryan, my husband, he's an accountant. He's good at digging through paperwork, good at following trails. We'll help you figure out what happened." "Why?" I asked. "Why do you want to help? If I take this house back, then we'll find somewhere else," Keisha cut in. "But at least we'll leave with the feeling that we did the right thing, that we helped fix something terrible." She reached across the table and took my hand. "What your sister did to you is a crime, and I don't care how long it takes or how hard it is. We're going to put everything back where it belongs, together." And in that moment, sitting at my own kitchen table with a stranger holding my hand, I realized something. Maybe, just maybe, not everything was lost. Maybe there were still good people in this world. Maybe there was still justice. And maybe, after 20 years in the dark, I was finally going to find the light again. But right then, just as I thought I'd touched a sliver of light, I understood something that chilled my blood. If Tanya could forge my death certificate, if Tanya could sell my house like it was an old piece of furniture, then Tanya had been preparing for this far longer than I ever imagined. And the real question was no longer, what did Tanya do? But what else is Tanya still hiding? Ryan Nolan came home at 6 p.m. I heard the sound of tires rolling into the driveway, the car door shut with a sharp click. Then the front door opened and footsteps crossed the porch, sounds so familiar they hurt, as if someone had accidentally switched on a memory I once had with Samuel. "Keisha?" Ryan called. "Where are you? The sentence cut off midair. He stood frozen in the kitchen doorway when he saw me sitting at the table, an unfamiliar elderly woman in worn-out clothes, white hair. Both hands trembling slightly as they cradled a cup of tea that had gone cold who knows when. Keisha sprang to her feet. "Ryan," she said, her voice tight but clear, "this is Claudine Rivers, and I need you to sit down and listen to a story." I told everything, one more time. Strangely, this time the words came out more easily, as if the first telling had broken a dam and the second telling was only water that had finally found a path. The arrest, the trial, 20 years in prison. Tanya promising to take care of the house, then disappearing. Samuel dying without me by his side. And now, that house had been sold to them by my own sister, with the claim that I was dead. Ryan was silent for a long time. He didn't interrupt. Didn't even whisper a single, "Oh my God." He just sat there, his face darkening with each detail, as if someone was slowly pulling a black curtain down in front of his eyes. Finally, he spoke. His voice was hard and cold. "The deed, the notarized paperwork, the death certificate, the inheritance documents, it's all fake." "It has to be," Keisha said. "Claudine isn't dead. She's sitting right here." Ryan looked straight at me, and in his eyes was something like anger on my behalf. "Miss Claudine, I'm an accountant. I work with numbers, records, and proof, and I'm very good at finding the truth when someone is trying to hide it." He stood up, dragging his chair back like a man stepping into a fight. "Give me 2 days. I'll find out exactly what your sister did." I lived through those 2 days as a guest in the house that used to be mine. Keisha put me in the living room, what used to be my sewing room, the place where I stitched curtains, quilted blankets, and once even made Halloween costumes for the neighbors' kids. Now that room held a double bed with blue sheets, family photos of the Nolans on the shelf. A desk in the corner where their oldest daughter did her homework. Every night I lay staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of this family living inside my house. Children laughing, feet pounding up the stairs, Keisha's voice reading bedtime stories, the sounds of a warm home, the sounds I once had with Samuel, and the sounds Tanya took from me. On the third morning, Ryan called us down to the kitchen. On the table, he had spread documents everywhere: bank records, sale receipts, transaction histories, screenshots pulled from public databases. "I found it," he said, his voice clamped tight around his rage. "I found everything." My heart pounded like a drum. "Found what?" Ryan picked up the first page. "This house was sold on July 15th, 2009 to us for $215,000. Seller, Tanya Rivers, listed as the sole surviving heir of the Rivers property." "I'm still alive," I whispered. "Yes." Ryan slid another page toward me, and this is the fake death certificate she filed. I saw my name on the paper, Claudine Marie Rivers. Date of death, March 3rd, 2009. Cause, heart failure, certified by a doctor named Dr. Harold Chen in Macon. Ryan continued, each word crisp as a nail driven into wood. "I tracked down Dr. Chen. He exists, but he retired in 2007 and moved to Florida. This signature that is forged." I stared at my own death. My name, my birth date, a fabricated date of death. every detail carefully filled in, like Tanya sat for hours writing out exactly how to bury me alive in the outside world. But it doesn't end there, Ryan said, flipping to another thick stack. Your belongings. Tanya sold them all. He started reading the list. His voice stayed even, but the anger inside it was impossible to hide. Your husband's woodworking tools, sold to an antique dealer in Atlanta, $12,000, August 2008. Furniture, sold in an estate sale September 2008, bringing in $18,000. Your mother's china set, sold on eBay, $2,400. Family jewelry, $5,800. And even your clothes. She donated them to Goodwill, but still requested receipts for a tax deduction. Each item was a memory. Each number was a piece of my life erased. Ryan paused, then looked at me. In total, from the contents of the home, $38,200. From selling the house, $215,000. And Ms. Claudine, you told me about the money in the safe. I nodded, my throat burning dry. $180,000, our life savings. Tanya knew where it was, knew the code. She was supposed to use it to pay the property taxes while I was away. I don't see any record of property taxes being paid, Ryan said. But I found this. He handed me a bank statement, an account in the name of Tanya Rivers. Deposit on September 8th, 2008, $180,000. She took it all, I rasped. My voice didn't even sound like mine anymore. Everything Samuel and I worked our whole lives to build, everything my parents left behind. She took it all, Ryan said, his voice cold as steel. Altogether, $433,200. That is the value of your life. That is what your sister stole. The room tilted. Keisha put a hand on my shoulder to keep me from collapsing. But there's more, Ryan said. And for the first time, he hesitated. This part, you need to prepare yourself. I swallowed. Say it. After everything I've just heard, but what could be worse than this? Ryan pulled out an old newspaper, an article about Gerald Whitmore's death. The man you were convicted of killing, he said slowly. I dug into his past. He looked me straight in the eye. He wasn't a random victim, Ms. Claudine. He was Tanya's boyfriend. I had heard many things in my life. I had heard the sentence 30 years fall like a hammer. I had heard that Samuel was dead like someone ripping my heart out of my chest. But that sentence, Gerald Whitmore was Tanya's boyfriend, froze me in a different way, because suddenly all the shattered pieces began to fit. If Tanya loved Whitmore, then Tanya didn't betray me only for money. Tanya betrayed me for a plan big enough to lock me away for 20 years and buy her a new life. And in that moment, I understood. What I was about to hear next wouldn't just hurt me. It would wake me up. The air in the kitchen thickened. Boyfriend? I repeated, my voice raw. Tanya and Gerald Whitmore? Ryan nodded. They were involved for over a year before he died. He had a wife, a woman named Patricia Whitmore, but he was cheating with Tanya. He pulled out more documents. I found this in the court records from your case. The police knew about the relationship. But somehow, it was never presented at trial as a motive. Motive for what? Keisha asked, tense. Ryan answered, short and cold. For Tanya killing him and framing her own sister. He spread out another document. Gerald Whitmore had a life insurance policy worth $2 million. Primary beneficiary, his wife, Patricia. But there was a clause. Ryan read each word clearly, as if afraid we might miss it. If the primary beneficiary is convicted of involvement in the insured's death, the money transfers to the secondary beneficiary. He looked up at me. The secondary beneficiary, femme, was a woman named Diana Wilson. I don't know who Diana Wilson is, I said, and even I could hear my own voice drifting away from my mouth. No one does, Ryan replied. Because Diana Wilson didn't exist before 2005. That's a fake identity. And the social security number tied to Diana Wilson. He paused, then continued, like a knife slicing through silence, was issued to Tanya Marie Rivers in 1977. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't process. Ryan spoke slowly, clearly, each word stamping the truth into place. Tanya killed Gerald Whitmore. Tanya created a fake identity to become the secondary beneficiary on his policy. Tanya framed you to remove you from the game, and when the prosecution couldn't prove Whitmore's wife was involved because she had a solid alibi, Tanya collected $2 million. So, I whispered, my hands gripping the edge of the table, $2 million plus the $433,000 from my assets. $2,400,000, Ryan said. That's what your sister decided your life was worth. I shot to my feet. The chair behind me slammed against the floor. I walked to the window and stared out at the yard, where Samuel and I used to drink coffee every morning, where Tanya used to run and play as a child. Why? The word came out of me like a groan. Why would she do that to me? I loved her. I would have done anything for her. Why? Ryan's voice softened, lower, gentler. I don't know, but I know how we find out and how we prove you're innocent. I turned back. How? We find Tanya, he said. We find her, and we make her tell the truth. The following week, Ryan worked like a man possessed. He hired a private investigator named Marcus Cole, a former FBI investigator, specializing in finding people who don't want to be found. It took Marcus 2 weeks to follow the trail, from bank accounts in Georgia to Arizona, from Arizona to Nevada. From Nevada to California. On a conference call, Marcus's voice came through the phone speaker. Your sister is very good at disappearing. She's used at least 4 different identities since 2006. Diana Wilson, Diane Mitchell, Diana Wells. And currently, Diana Hartley. Where is she now? I asked. Rancho Mirage, California, a very upscale, gated community. She's been there about 6 years, and she's married to a man named Richard Hartley, a retired surgeon, widower, net worth around $8 million. Of course. Tanya had found another wealthy man to manipulate. I asked, is there anything else I need to know? Marcus was silent for a moment, then said, she's sick. According to medical records I obtained, Diana Hartley was diagnosed with stage 3 pancreatic cancer 8 months ago. She's in treatment, but the prognosis isn't good. Stage 3 pancreatic cancer. I should have felt satisfied. Like karma had finally knocked, but all I felt was tired. How long does she have? I asked. The doctors say 6 months to a year, maybe less. 6 months. Tanya was dying. The sister who stole 20 years of my life was dying, and I still had a question. One question only she could answer. Why? I need to see her, I said. I need to talk to Tanya face to face. Ryan objected immediately. Miss Claudine, if she knows we've uncovered this, she could destroy evidence. Run. She's dying, I cut him off. She isn't going anywhere. And I didn't spend 20 years in prison to get my answers from a courtroom. I need to hear it from her mouth. I need to look her in the eyes and ask why. Ryan and Keisha looked at each other, one of those silent conversations only long-married couples understand. Finally, Keisha nodded. We're going to California, she said. We're going to find your sister. And we're going to make her tell the truth. A week later, I sat on an airplane for the first time in my life, 72 years old, out of prison for 1 month, flying across half the country to face the sister who destroyed my life. Out the window, I watched Georgia fade beneath me. Green hills giving way to brown plains, then mountains, then desert. And somewhere, at the end of this journey, in a luxury house in California, Tanya was waiting. The sister I once loved, the woman who took everything. At last, after 20 years, we would talk. And this time I would get the truth. The plane landed in Palm Springs at 2 in the afternoon. California air was nothing like Georgia. Dry, hot, and carrying a strange smell. Slightly chemical, like plastic heating under the sun. Or maybe I had simply forgotten what freedom smelled like after 20 years of breathing recycled air in prison. Ryan rented a car and we drove straight to Rancho Mirage. This city didn't look like anywhere I'd ever seen. Everything was glass, chrome, and perfectly manicured lawns, as if people were using green on purpose to challenge the desert around them. Here, the strongest scent wasn't plants and it wasn't soil. It was money, and the desperate effort to pretend you don't live in the middle of nothing. Tanya's neighborhood, Desert Crown Estates, had a guarded gate, private security, the kind of place where each house costs more than other people earn in a lifetime. Ryan stopped at the gate. I looked up at the security camera, knowing for certain that somewhere someone was looking back. "We're here to visit Diana Hartley," Ryan told the guard. "She's expecting us." It was a lie. Of course Tanya wasn't expecting us. She didn't know I'd been released, didn't know I'd uncovered the truth, didn't know that after 20 years her sister was standing at the entrance to her new life, ready to demand back the life that had been stolen. The guard checked the list, frowned, made a call. I clenched my hands together, forcing myself to breathe. If they refused to let us in... "All right," the guard said. "House number 47, end of the street on the right." The gate opened. We drove in. Tanya's house sat at the end of a cul-de-sac, a sprawling one-story estate, red tile roof, a circular drive. Out front was a fountain, real water in the desert, and a row of palm trees that, just by looking at them, I could guess cost more to maintain than my trust did back then. This was where Tanya lived, with my money, with my 20 years. "Are you sure?" Ryan asked, turning to look at me from the driver's seat. I wasn't sure of anything anymore, but I nodded. "Let's go." We walked up to the porch. Ryan pressed the doorbell. A moment passed. Nothing happened. Then I heard footsteps inside, slow, unsteady, dragging, like someone shuffling, the footsteps of someone who was sick. The door opened, and there, after 20 years, stood my sister. At first, I truly didn't recognize her. The woman in front of me was gaunt as a skeleton. Her hair was gone, chemotherapy, I guessed, and she had a silk scarf wrapped around her head. Her face was sharp-boned, her skin sallow, her eyes sunken as if time had hollowed her out. But those eyes, I recognized them instantly, the blue eyes like our mother's. The blue I had trusted my whole life. Tanya looked at me. For the first beat, her face was blank, uncomprehending. Then recognition flooded in, and she smiled. "Claudine," she said, her voice hoarse and thin as paper. "I've been wondering when you'd come looking for me." No apology, no shock, no fear, only that smile, a cold, calculating smile. And somehow, I had been blind enough not to see it my entire life. "Come in, Tanya said, stepping aside. "We have a lot to talk about, don't we?" Inside Tanya's house was exactly what I expected. Expensive, tasteful, and cold. Everything was white, cream, or pale gray, like a gallery. So spotless there were no traces of real life, no family photos. No keepsakes, nothing that suggested a heart lived here. Tanya led us into the living room. Floor-to-ceiling glass looked out onto the desert. She moved carefully. One hand pressed against her abdomen like she was holding her body together. "Please sit," she said, gesturing to the white leather sofa. "Would you like anything to drink? Water? Tea?" "We didn't come here for tea," I said. For the first time in 20 years, I heard my own voice, and I didn't recognize it. It was hard, cold, packed tight with rage I'd spent 20 years swallowing. Tanya lowered herself into an armchair, winced slightly from pain, then lifted her gaze to Ryan. "And who is this? Your lawyer?" "My name is Ryan Nolan." Ryan said, "and I'm the man living in the house you sold in 2009, the house you told my wife and me belonged to you after your sister, Claudine, died." "Ah," Tanya nodded slowly. "So you figured it out." "Took you long enough." 20 years, I said, my voice shaking because even I couldn't hold it steady. "You left me in prison for 20 years, Tanya. 20 years behind bars for a crime I didn't commit. And you, what did you do? You lived in luxury? You spent my money? You built yourself a new life while I was buried alive?" Tanya stared at me for a long time. Then she did the last thing I expected to see. She laughed. A dry, bitter laugh that turned into a coughing fit. "I did what I had to do," Tanya said when the coughing eased. "I survived, Claudine. That's what I did. You know what you came here to ask," Tanya said, not as a question, but as a declaration. "After all these years, you still don't understand, do you?" "Tell me," I said. "Tell me so I understand why the sister I loved, who I protected my whole life, could do that." Tanya leaned back, her eyes drifting toward the desert outside as if it had happened to someone else. "You want the truth?" she said. "Fine. Claudine, you can have it." And Tanya began to speak, each word like a knife. "You were the loved child," Tanya said, "always. Claudine, the perfect one. Claudine, the good one. Claudine, who did the right thing. Mom looked at you like she was watching the sun rise. And me? I was the problem, the difficult child, the one who always disappointed people. Mom loved you, Claudine. Truly loved you. But with me, she only tolerated me." "That's not true," I started. "Don't interrupt," Tanya cut in, sharp as a blade. "You want the truth, so here it is." She inhaled, then continued, her voice dry and ruthless. "And when Mom died, she proved it. She gave you a house worth $200,000. She gave me $23,000 in life insurance. That's what I was worth to her, $23,000. I remembered the will. That division. I had never thought it was unfair. I had only thought it was what our mother wanted. Do you know what that feels like?" Tanya asked, her eyes locked on mine. "To watch you have everything, while I got scraps?" "If you felt that way, why didn't you say so?" I asked. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you wouldn't understand," Tanya said. "You would have said Mom loved us both the same. You would have said I was too sensitive. You would have said I should be grateful. You were always so good at making me feel guilty for my feelings." Tanya leaned forward. Those blue eyes turned glass cold. "So I decided, if Mom gave you everything, then I would take it. I would take what should have been mine from the beginning." Ryan spoke up, cutting straight to the point. "Gerald Whitmore, tell us about him." Tanya's smile shifted into something almost nostalgic. Gerald was my ticket out. Rich, successful, and willing to leave his wife for me. We had a plan. We were going to start over somewhere else, together. But something went wrong, I said, my voice rough. "His wife found out," Tanya replied flatly, "threatened to take everything in the divorce." Gerald panicked, said he couldn't leave her. Too risky, too expensive. Tanya paused, looking at me like I was someone who had never learned life's lesson. He was going to abandon me. Like everyone else. So I did what I had to do. "You killed him," I whispered. "I hired someone to kill him," Tanya corrected coldly. "Curtis Webb, an idiot with a record and nothing to lose. $8,000 cash. Money I withdrew from your account, thanks to that legal power of attorney you signed for me years ago." My heart tightened. I remembered that power of attorney. When Samuel had his first heart attack, I wanted to be sure that if anything happened, someone could access our accounts. I trusted Tanya. Of course I trusted her. "I created the Diana Wilson identity," Tanya continued, her voice like she was presenting a project. "I added my name to Gerald's policy as the secondary beneficiary. I created evidence against you. The USB with the plan written in your handwriting. Your handwriting, I practiced copying it for 6 months. Then I came to you that night. The story about gambling debt, about Gerald and fraud. I knew you'd believe me. You always believed me. Her voice softened just a little, almost gentle. And that was what made my skin crawl. You made it easy, Claudine. You always did. My stomach twisted. Samuel, I asked, my voice breaking, when Samuel died, did you go to the funeral? No, Tanya said. I was busy selling your house at the time. No regret, no guilt, just blunt, icy truth. There are moments when you think you've already hit rock bottom. I thought my bottom was the day they handcuffed me and dragged me out of my home. The day I heard Samuel had died and I couldn't say goodbye. The nights I lay in my cell, hearing crying through the walls and wondering what I was still alive for. But it turns out, the bottom isn't prison. The real bottom is sitting in this luxury house in the desert, looking straight into your sister's eyes and hearing her describe her crimes the way someone describes a business deal. Because when evil doesn't tremble, when betrayal doesn't cry, you understand one thing. You didn't lose 20 years to an accident. You lost 20 years because someone chose to take them. And right after that, I knew there would be one final stab. Ryan had recorded everything. His phone in his pocket had been turned on before we stepped inside. Every sentence, every word, every confession. Ryan looked at Tanya, his voice grave. Do you understand what you're saying? You just confessed to premeditated murder, fraud, perjury? This will be turned over to the FBI, the Arizona Attorney General's office. I'm dying. Tanya cut him off. I have 6 months, maybe less. You think I care about charges? She looked at me, and for the first time, I saw something like emotion flash in her eyes. Not regret, not apology. Just maybe fatigue. I did what I had to do to survive, Claudine, Tanya said. You will never understand because you never had to. You were always loved, always favored. Always had everything. You had Samuel, you had the house, you had respect, you had the life I could never have no matter what I did. So I took it. Tanya's mouth twisted. And you know what? I'd do it again if I could, because those 20 years while you sat in prison were the best years of my life. I stood up so fast I couldn't even think. I couldn't sit anymore, couldn't look at that face for one more second. Goodbye, Tanya, I said. I hope your remaining months were worth what you paid to get them. I turned toward the door. Ryan followed. Claudine, Tanya called. I stopped, but I didn't turn around. You asked me once in the visitation room, Tanya said. Do you remember? You asked why. Why it had to be you. Or me. I stood still, feeling as if the whole desert outside was holding its breath. So, the world only has room for one loved child, Tanya said, her voice light as wind, and Mom chose you. So I had to make sure you understood what it feels like to be abandoned, what it feels like to lose everything. Now you know. I walked out of the house, and I didn't look back. We left Tanya's house and drove straight to the airport in silence. I sat in the back seat, watching the California desert slide past the window like a film reel with no soundtrack. For 20 years, I had asked myself, why? I had clung to that question the way you cling to a rope so you don't drown. And now I had the answer. It wasn't some profound, complicated secret. It was jealousy. Jealousy of our mother's love, of the house, of the life I had with Samuel. And that jealousy rotted Tanya from the inside out until she finally decided if she couldn't have it, then I wasn't allowed to have it either. She didn't just take money or take a house. She took 20 years. She took my old age. She took the days I should have lived freely beside Samuel. Are you okay? Keisha asked softly, turning around from the front seat. I shook my head. I don't know. I thought knowing the truth would make me feel lighter, but it doesn't? She asked. I stared out the window. No, it just makes everything worse, because there's no reason that's worth it. There's nothing that can justify locking someone away for 20 years out of jealousy. Ryan glanced at me in the rearview mirror. His voice was firm. But we have the recording. We have her confession. We're going to prove you're innocent. I knew. I should have been happy. But in that moment, all I felt was empty. The truth couldn't bring Samuel back. It couldn't give me back the years that had been stolen. But it could return something else. My name. Back in Georgia, Ryan contacted the Tennessee Innocence Project. They assigned a young attorney named Jessica Huang. I met Jessica in a small office in Nashville. She was petite, but her eyes looked like they were on fire. Ms. Rivers, Jessica said, gripping my hand in a firm handshake. I've read your file, and honestly, this is one of the worst cases I've ever seen. I didn't kill Gerald Whitmore, I said automatically, the sentence I had repeated my whole life. Jessica nodded immediately. I know. And we're going to prove it. She laid the most important items on the table. The audio recording from California, the bank records, proof of the fake identity, the insurance policy connected to Diana Wilson. The original case was investigated far too shallowly, Jessica said, her voice tight with restrained anger. They had a suspect that fit the right story, and they stopped. They didn't dig into Tanya. They didn't verify documents. They didn't do the bare minimum. So what do we do now? I asked. Now we file a petition for exoneration, Jessica replied. With a recorded confession from the real perpetrator, I'm confident we win. How long will it take? Jessica was blunt. Usually a very long time. But with a recording like this, I'm going to push for an expedited process. A few months. I swallowed hard. After 20 years, a few months sounded like something that couldn't possibly be real. And Tanya? I asked. Jessica slowed for a beat. She's in hospice. She may not live long enough to appear in court, but she won't get away. Her husband has filed for divorce. Her assets are frozen, and that confession will become part of the public record. Then Jessica looked straight at me. Most importantly, you will be exonerated. The world will know you're innocent. Jessica filed the petition for exoneration, and everything moved faster than I expected. Within days, my case was reopened. Then the media started showing up. Photos of me from 2006, my hair still brown, my eyes still full of trust. And photos of me now, hair gray, face older, but no longer behind bars. Reporters called nonstop. They came to the Nolan house asking everything. Ryan and Keisha tried to shield me, but there were a few interviews I chose to do, not because I wanted fame, but because I wanted people to understand an innocent person can be swallowed by the system with just one wrong step. When they asked about Tanya, I said plainly, I don't want to live on anger. I lost 20 years because of Tanya. I won't lose one more day because of her. They asked, do you forgive her? I stayed silent for a long time. Then I said, I don't know if I'd call it forgiveness. I only know. I understand now. And once you understand, you can let go. The hearing took place in July, a few months after the California trip. I stood in the same courtroom where I had once been convicted. Jessica stood beside me. Ryan, Keisha, and their children sat behind us. Judge Morrison read the findings. Falsified evidence, false testimony, Tanya's calculated manipulation. Then he looked at me over his glasses. On behalf of the state of Tennessee, I offer my deepest apology. You were grievously wronged, and while nothing can return the years you lost, I hope this ruling brings you some closure. He brought down the gavel. Claudine Rivers, your conviction is hereby vacated. You are exonerated of all charges. This court affirms that you are completely innocent. The courtroom erupted. Keisha cried, Ryan clapped, and Mia, his oldest daughter, ran up and wrapped her arms around me. "You did it," she whispered. "You're free." I stood there, unable to speak. I only felt a sharp ache in my chest, in a strange kind of way. For the first time in 20 years, I felt like I had my name back. 2 weeks later, Jessica called me. "Ms. Rivers, Tanya passed away last night." I sat down at the kitchen chair. Keisha was cooking dinner, the smell of food spreading through the house like a sign of ordinary life. "How?" I asked. "In her sleep, at a hospital in Rancho Mirage, alone, no funeral. Her body will be cremated. Tanya died alone." I thought I would feel satisfied, karma, justice, but what I felt was only tired. And somewhere, very deep, a small sadness for the Tanya she used to be, before jealousy turned her into someone else. I set the phone down and looked out into the backyard where the Nolan kids were laughing and playing. Tanya was gone, and I was still here. By September, the civil matter was closed. What remained of Tanya's estate after the divorce and legal fees was awarded to me as compensation, $780,000. It would never be enough to buy back time, but it was enough for me to stand on my own feet. I bought a small house in the suburbs of Athens, close to the Nolans. Not my grandmother's house, not the place where Samuel and I once lived, but it was mine. I hung Samuel's old photograph on a shelf, placed the silver cross beside my bed. I planted a few flower beds, simple ones like my mother used to. I went back to the local library and volunteered, helping children with their homework. Every week, I ate dinner with the Nolan family, and when Keisha gave birth to a baby girl, they named her Rose. I held that child in my arms, tears sliding down my cheeks. "You don't have to do that," I said. Keisha smiled, her voice steady. "You're family. You're her grandmother." Family. Once that word was tied to betrayal. Now it was tied to something else. People who chose to love me, even without sharing my blood. I lost so much. Samuel, the old house, 20 years of a human life. But I also got back something I once thought I would never recover. The truth. And with the truth, freedom. Not just the freedom of walking out of a prison gate, but the freedom of breaking the invisible chains of the past. My name is Claudine Rivers, and after 20 years in the dark, I found a way to keep living. If you've made it all the way here, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications for me. Because stories like this aren't just something you listen to and move on. They remind us that the truth can come late, but it doesn't mean it never comes. And who knows? The next episode might be the story that makes you see family in a completely different way.